The word essential is in front of amino acids for two reasons. First, it's in front of the word amino acids because you have to have essential amino acids to live. If you go long enough without them, you will die. Number two, they are something that your body cannot make on its own. If you are interested in losing body fat and gaining lean muscle tissue at the same time, you have to understand how muscle protein synthesis works. I'm Kristin Rowell. I'm your host of the Energetically Efficient Show, and I love talking about all things muscle building and fat loss. So we're really going to get into it today. I decided to record this podcast episode because I've received a number of questions over social media over the years, and some very recently, that inquire of me as to what I think about this particular protein bar. What do I think about this particular protein product? What about this newfangled thing on the market? And the truth is that a lot of the things that I see are just really, really good money spent on marketing dollars. They aren't things that are actually going to allow you to build muscle and lose fat at the same time. So I want to get into that with you today, and I want to help you understand if you really desire in 2026 specifically to maximize the amount of muscle that you build and to lose the amount of body fat that you want, how is the most efficient way to do that? What's the quickest way to do that? And how can you eat in a way that's going to support those two goals? What I want to talk to you about today specifically is an amino acid profile. And before your eyes cross and you're like, oh my God, Kristin, I don't want to get into all the science, I'm going to break this down as simply as I can for you because this is something that I really believe everyone should know. When we eat protein, and I should back up and say, by the way, it's all the rage right now to have everyone telling you, eat your protein, eat your protein, eat your protein. But that doesn't mean we can just eat protein willy-nilly, not understand the source, and just eat vats of it in large amounts and expect it to get us to our goals. In a perfect world, we would dose our protein multiple times throughout the day in a certain amount, and it's to create a particular process in the body that allows you to gain lean muscle tissue. And the process that I'm talking about is something called muscle protein synthesis. It's referred to in the scientific literature, abbreviated as MPS. So you really care about MPS if you want to build muscle and lose body fat. And the reason for that is every single time you stimulate this process called muscle protein synthesis in your body, you are signaling from your brain to, let's say, your bicep, to, let's say, your thigh, to, let's say, your butt muscles, to, let's say, your abs, wherever you're building muscle, you're stimulating a signal from your brain to that body part, build muscle, build muscle, build muscle. You want that signal to be released a certain number of times during the day. And obviously, the more times we can have it released, the better. And the maximal amount of times you could have it released and not overstuff yourself with protein would be ideal. I'll tell you about my personal experiment that I did where I really learned all about this. But before we get into my personal experience, I just want to tell you about why the amino acid profile is so important. To do that, I'm going to show you two of my favorite amino acid supplements, okay? And I'll put up in the screen here, you're going to see what the amino acid profile is of these two products, but these are Body Health Perfect Aminos. I talk about these all the time. And these are Kion Aminos, and I talk about these all the time. Both of these are comprised of essential amino acids. Their formulation is virtually identical. It only has some minor differences. I'm going to show you the Kion one, or I'm going to put the Kion one up here, simply because it actually shows you the breakdown of what is in one scoop of these amino acids. And when I read this to you, I just want you to listen to what you're hearing in terms of these amino acids. They are leucine, lysine, isoleucine, valine, threonine, phenylalanine, methionine, histidine, and tryptophan. Okay, these are 10 that are listed. Now, on the Body Health amino acids, you have the same exact, let me just count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes, you have the same amino acids, and they do add a couple more, but truthfully, either of these work to build muscle on your body. Then the question is, how much? Another question is why? Why, Kristin, with all those scientific names that you just read off, those amino acid names, why do I even care? Why does that even matter? Well, the reason it matters is because not only do you have to have those essential amino acids in whatever protein source you're consuming to build muscle, to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, you also need to have those amino acids in a certain amount. So let me just recap this before I move on because I don't want this to be too confusing. With those amino acids I just read, those are all essential amino acids. There are actually 20 amino acids. I just read you 9 or 10 of them. And those 10 amino acids that I read you, 9 are essential. There's an argument of, or whether the other one is essential. It's called histidine. I'm not going to get into that with you, but let's just assume for the purposes of this that nine, there we go, of those amino acids are essential. So first we have to have the essential amino acids. And just as a reminder, I've talked about this in other podcast episodes, you guys, but the word essential is in front of us of amino acids for 2 reasons. First, it's in front of the word amino acids because you have to have essential amino acids to live. If you go long enough without them, you will die. You literally have to have them. Okay. Number 2, the word essential is in front of amino acids because they are something that your body cannot make on its own. Your body can do a lot of cool shit on its own, you guys. Your body can, I always use this as an example. There are literally babies born to crack addicts. There are babies born to heroin addicts. And those babies somehow figure out how to get their nutrition. They figure out how to live over time. Like, it's a miracle. The body is a miracle. However, the essential amino acids, these 9 essential amino acids that I mentioned to you, if you don't have those over time, you will not be alive, and your body can't make them. It cannot make them on its own. So again, over time, if you don't get those essential amino acids, you will not survive. Okay. So they're very important. So now we know that we have to have essential amino acids. We know that there are 9 of them, 10, depending on who you talk to. But now it's like, how do we know how much of those that we need? So of the essential amino acids that I read to you, there are 3 of them, just 3 of them, that are something called branch chain amino acids. And you've probably heard of this term before. You see this on a lot of fandangled products out in places like GNC or other sports stores or nutrition stores. And that is something called branch chain amino acids, again, BCAAs. And the branch chain amino acids are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. So those 3 amino acids of the 9 essential amino acids are a subset of them called branch chain amino acids. Again, the 3 branch chain amino acids, which are also part of the 9 essential amino acids, are isoleucine, leucine, and valine. The research that's been done on amino acids and the way that we figured this out is there's something called a leucine threshold. You have to cross over a leucine threshold, meaning you have to have enough leucine of all of those essential amino acids. You have to have enough leucine in the protein you're consuming to help get you over the leucine threshold to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, to remind your brain to send the signal to your bicep or your butt or your thighs or your abs or your calves, wherever you're building muscle. You have to have enough leucine in that to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. If you don't get over the leucine threshold, I don't care how much protein you eat, you will not stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So this is very important. Now, what could we consume that has enough leucine versus what might we consume that doesn't have enough leucine? And this is where I get a little nuts about all of these fandangled protein bars and other things that were being sold, no matter where we turn, because we see a lot of marketing that says things like real whole ingredients, all natural, organic, grass-fed collagen, protein only from plants, you name it. We see a lot of that on the marketplace. We know that only some of them are going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, while others simply are not. And so what I want to share with you throughout this episode now is, how do we discern? How do we read labels? How do we evaluate a new food product? How do we think about how we're going to feed our body so that we're actually eating in a way that stimulates muscle protein synthesis and not totally over consuming calories so that we aren't losing fat and gaining muscle at the same time? Remember, I'm also going to tell you a story, my story about that as well. So do you remember when I was reading you the amino acids on this bottle of Kion? I'm going to put that photo again up here. Do you see how the number 1 amino acid listed, what is most in this supplement, is leucine? That's what they put the most of, because we know we have to consume over the leucine threshold in order to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So I won't read all of the science to you, but I was looking at a paper before I started recording this episode for you, because I was trying to find the exact paper regarding muscle protein synthesis and protein signaling that I remember reading a few years ago. And it's a paper that I will link below this video. And it's from December of 2023. So it's a very recent paper, and it's called Kinetic Modeling of Leucine Mediated Signaling and Protein Metabolism in Human Skeletal Muscle. That is a mouthful. However, what the thrust of the paper shows and what they were studying is, what is it that we have to consume by way of a bolus of protein containing a certain amount of leucine in order to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And this paper, by the way, was confirming what we already knew in prior research. This concept is not new as of 2023. This has been around for a while. But essentially, the way I want you to think about it, to just put it as simple as possible, and then I can get into more details, is you would want to consume at least 30 grams of protein in a meal. Okay, so at least 30 grams. So let's just call it 30 to 35 so we can be a little bit loose with our definition, but at least 30. You may consume as much as 40 grams of protein. You may consume as much as 50. Doesn't matter. But as long as you're consuming as much as 30 grams of protein, and ideally that would be from an animal protein source that has all of the essential amino acids. So this is where it becomes very easy to eat enough essential amino acids if you're eating animal meat, because you could do 30 to 35 grams of protein from salmon, from cod, from pasture-raised chicken, from grass-fed beef, from wild-caught shrimp, from halibut, from egg whites mixed with some egg yolks. You'd have to have a lot of eggs to get 30 grams of protein. I always warn people that if you want at least 30 grams of protein from eggs, you have to eat 5 eggs in one sitting, which some people can do. Yours truly can do very easily, but some people have a hard time with that. So it's just a note that you may want to consume something else other than eggs to get your protein. You could get 30 grams of protein from a mix of yogurt and, let's say, a high quality whey protein powder. So there's all sorts of different ways to get 30 grams of protein from an animal protein source, just like all of the ones I just mentioned. How do we potentially run the risk of consuming 30 or 45 grams of protein, 40 grams of protein without having the essential amino acids needed for muscle building? Well, that would be, you would consume a lot of different plant protein sources. So you would go eat a ton of protein in the form of quinoa. You would eat protein in the form, and I always say this is a fat source, but some people call it a protein, in the form of peanut butter. You would eat your protein in the form of beans. You would eat your protein in the form of chia seeds, of, boy, what else could we look at? Pumpkin seeds, pistachios, all sorts of things that aren't going to be enough to stimulate muscle protein synthesis because they won't have the right amount of leucine, isoleucine, and valine combined with all of those other essential amino acids that I listed for you that are on the labels of both Kion and Body Health. Okay. So how much leucine do we need to have in a serving, in a sitting, in order to stimulate muscle protein synthesis? Well, the research is pretty clear that the leucine threshold is somewhere between 2 grams and 3 grams. And most experts would say, in order to be on the safe side, you want to have at least 2.5 grams of leucine. Some people say at least 2.7 grams of leucine. Some people say make sure you have 3. But for adults, I think the number can be a little smaller for kids. In fact, I did do a little bit of research before recording this podcast episode, and I want to say it was closer to 1 to 2 grams of leucine for children, but it's closer to that 3 gram threshold for adults. So what would that look like if you want to maximize the amount of muscle that you're going to build during the day and maximize the amount of fat you're going to lose during the day? How would you do that? Well, what you would do is you would stimulate muscle protein synthesis as many times as possible for as few of calories as possible. So I know that sounds like, wait a second, Kristin, how would I do this? This sounds like this might be a strategy I want to employ. And it may be, and I've done it, and this is where I'm going to bring in my personal story because it's a very interesting way to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. You can very much, I always say, whittle your body down like really quickly if you practice this for, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks. Now, you might feel like it's Groundhog's Day every day because you're eating the same thing every day for 4 to 6 weeks. But I will tell you, there is nothing more effective if you want to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. And I tell clients all the time, if you really want to know, you guys, whether something works for you, whether this thing that X person did, this influencer did, this scientist did, this bodybuilder did, it doesn't matter. If you want to find out whether that works for you, the only way you will know whether it works for you is if you run an experiment for something along the lines of 30 days. And I did a podcast episode about this back in 2025 about really how you can experiment on your body and just pick something and run with it for 30 days. You will be amazed at the results. I recommend that you do a bod pod or a DEXA scan in the beginning of your journey, and then a bod pod or DEXA scan at the end of your journey so that you can compare your results. But when I tell you my story that I'm about to tell you, you'll be like, holy cow. So my story starts in 2017. Now, in 2017 was when I decided at the age of 40 years old that I was going to do, was I 40 at that time or 41? No, I was 40. I was about to turn 41. So I decided to do my first bodybuilding competition. And I hired a woman because at this time I was very busy trial lawyering. And I hired a woman to provide me with an outline of a nutrition plan that I would follow for the 6 weeks leading up to my show. Now, I will tell you, some people, when they say, wait, you only prepared for your show, Kristin, for 6 weeks before your show, I do feel like the food prep was only that long. I might have started posing a little earlier, but honest to God, I tend to keep myself in really lean, muscular shape all year round. So I don't do this. I have to prep for 6 months, then I reverse diet and gain for 6 months. I don't do that. I just keep myself lean all year. And then when I want to step on stage, I tighten it up for about 4 to 8 weeks, depending on where I'm at before my prep. So for this particular show, for my very first show, I prepped for 6 weeks. So what I had to eat every day for 6 weeks was 200 grams of protein, which is like, okay. So what I did is I would eat 6 days, the exact same thing, which was a lot of protein with a little bit of vegetable, or a lot of vegetable rather. I had a fair amount of vegetable and very little fat. So this was high protein plus vegetables with a tiny bit of fat. On the 7th day, I would carb load. So I would eat a tremendous amount of carbohydrates. For me, it was actually too much. I ate on that day 300 grams of carbohydrates. And I'll be perfectly honest with you guys, eating that much carbohydrate, especially when you still have to eat that 200 grams of protein, I was like, whoa. I mean, my gut couldn't handle it. It was terrible. I did not like eating that much carbohydrate in one day. So fast forward to 2018, when I got even fitter and leaner getting ready for my shows, I told my nutrition coach I was working with at the time, I said, look, that 300 grams of carbohydrates in a day was just way too much for me. I couldn't do it. And so we separated out so that I did 3 days of low carb, 1 day of high carb, 3 days of low carb, 1 day of high carb, 3 days of low carb, 1 day of high carb. And I just kept rotating that. So it ended up being not full 2 days of high carb each week, but about every 8 days. So on that high carb day for me, during that prep, it was 150 grams of carbohydrates rather than 300. And I found that way more manageable than consuming 300 grams of carbohydrates in one day. Okay, but more importantly, to the topic that I wanted to share about with you today, to this whole issue of stimulating muscle protein synthesis, I had to eat, to get in that 200 grams of protein, I didn't eat 50 grams of protein 4 times a day, which would equal 200, of course. I ate 30 to 35 grams of protein 6 times a day. I had to eat 6 different times a day. And every time I ate that 30 to 35 grams of protein. Why? Because then I was stimulating muscle protein synthesis 6 times a day. 6 different times throughout my day, I was sending the signal from my brain to my bicep, to my pecs, to my abs, to my butt, to my calves, whatever muscle you want to build. I was sending the signal from my brain, build muscle, build muscle, build muscle. So my body became a muscle building machine. And when you start to become such a muscle building machine, consuming that much protein, and also not consuming a lot of excess calorie on top of it. So I wasn't consuming a lot of carbohydrate. I was just eating vegetables like celery, like green peppers, like broccoli, like cucumber, like greens. Those are the kinds of things I was eating all day in addition to the protein. And then I was consuming a very little amount of fat, just a little bit of avocado with a couple of meals, a little bit of coconut oil with the meals, just enough to satiate my taste buds so that it wasn't so horrible. And obviously to give me a little bit of essential fatty acids throughout the 6 weeks. In doing that, you become a muscle building machine and a fat burning machine at the same time. Now, why didn't I continue doing this? If this was so effective and I got down to 14% body fat the first time and 13% body fat the second time, why didn't I continue with this? Well, number one, it's completely exhausting to do this kind of meal prep every single day. And then, of course, I was at the law firm at the time. So I was bringing all of my food to the office in the morning. I had to stop every 2.5 to 3 hours to eat a meal. So I would go and heat my meal up quick in the microwave at my law firm. I would bring it into my office and work while I was eating. But it's a commitment. You guys, eating 6 times a day requires you to essentially be on an eating schedule from about 7:30 in the morning until about 8 o'clock at night. So I would eat my first meal at home, usually after I got done with a run. So I was having oatmeal with protein powder. And then I'd get to the office, and within 2.5 to 3 hours, I was eating egg whites, cucumber, and a little bit of avocado. 2.5 to 3 hours later, I was eating 5 ounces of grass-fed ground beef and a cup of green or red pepper, because I love that together. And then 2.5 to 3 hours later, I was eating 5 ounces of cod with another vegetable and a little bit of avocado. 2.5 to 3 hours later, I was eating 5 ounces of turkey or chicken with a little bit of coconut oil. And 2.5 to 3 hours later, I was doing salmon with another vegetable. I mean, it was animal protein, animal protein, animal protein, animal protein, literally every 2.5 to 3 hours. And I had to do that for 6 weeks. It is very effective. Okay. But what did this experiment teach me? This experiment taught me I was literally a micro of the macro example that we know in the science, which is stimulating muscle protein synthesis is going to get you to build muscle as fast as possible. You guys, in that 6-week experiment that I did a bod pod at the beginning and a bod pod at the end, the day before my show. I gained 7 pounds of lean muscle tissue, and I lost 5% body fat. I literally went, and here's what's interesting. And I tell clients this all the time. It's one of the reasons I hate scales. My weight, my pounds on the scale went up by 0.3. Okay. I lost 5% body fat. I look like a different person. Every single striation of my muscle, every vein popped, every ab was showing, every single thing, because I had such little body fat. I was down to 14%. And it was because of the fact that I was losing all of that fat and gaining muscle at the same time, but muscle weighs more than fat. I show this to clients all the time, and I will show you here. This is the representation of 10 pounds of fat. This is 10 pounds of muscle. Look at how much smaller 10 pounds of muscle is. It's compact, it's tight, it's little. 10 pounds of fat is bigger, it's soft, it's squishy, it's blobby. Okay? So when you go with your body by gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time, you transform your body composition, you feel better, you look better, you're so much stronger, you have more energy, everything in your life gets better when you improve your metabolic health in that way. Now, I am not suggesting to women, by the way, that you should stay or get to 14% body fat, 13% body fat, anything like that for an extended period of time. I tend to hover in between 15 and 18%, depending on the year, depending on my hormones, depending on, what sort of program I'm in, depending on what sort of experiments I'm running, depending on how much I'm running, whether I'm, getting ready for a bodybuilding show. That's where I tend to stay. And that's a healthy range for women. Healthy body fat for women is 15% on the low end and 28% on the high end. So if you get a DEXA scan or if you get a bod pod, ladies, you want to be in that 15 to 28%. And if you aren't in that 15 to 28% and you really want one-on-one support and help, you can always reach out to me. I have links on my website at energeticallyefficient.com for you to reach out and inquire about one-on-one coaching. I also launch various courses throughout the year that help you learn about how to do this on your own. However, if it's something you feel like you want help with in 2026, I'd love to support you. So make sure you feel that you visit my website and feel free to reach out if that calls to you. Okay, so getting back to our amino acids. So remember I said I need you to have somewhere between 2 to 3 grams of leucine and ideally 2.5 or even 2.7. It's funny, you guys, if you go to a GNC, you will see tons of random protein brands like protein powder jars that will say on the jar, all of the essential amino acids, including the BCAAs, at least 2.7 grams of leucine per serving. They all know this. They all know that for people who are tuned into muscle building, they know you want to have 2.7 grams of leucine per sitting in what you're consuming. So if you get advertised some sort of cool new grass-fed collagen protein bar on Instagram, what I want to encourage you to do is to first read the ingredients and then read the macros. So if the ingredients where it says what the protein is from, if it's collagen, if it's pea, if it's a lot of plant-based proteins that are a blend, that don't say things like whey, that don't say things like milk, that aren't from animal sources of protein, chances are that particular protein source is not going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. In fact, I can almost guarantee you that it's not going to. I can assure you, especially if the bar has less than 30 grams of protein. If the bar has less than 30 grams of protein, it's not going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, full stop. Doesn't matter. So the bar has to have at least 30 grams of protein. And then the 30 grams of protein have to be comprised of a protein source that will contain all of the essential amino acids. Again, those are essentially animal protein sources, and the right amount of branched chain amino acids, which are your leucine, isoleucine, and valine, with leucine at that leucine threshold of over 2.7 grams. Does your head hurt yet? I apologize if that's true. I was trying to break this down for you simply, but I hope this isn't too confusing. I want to kind of summarize everything we've talked about so that you can say, okay, if my goal is to build muscle and to lose body fat in the new year, here's something I could do. I could run a 4-week experiment. I could run a 6-week experiment. I could run an 8-week experiment. And what I would do is I would get a bod pod or a DEXA scan at the beginning of that experiment. That's something that I require all of my clients do at the beginning of their work with me, so I can show them how they can change their body composition. And we have to know where we're starting to know where we're going. So I like them to get that at the beginning. And then based on giving them the right macro balance, having them eat foods that taste delicious, making sure the right amount of protein from the right sources, they're going to stimulate those muscle protein synthesis signals. They're going to help balance their hormones, and that aren't requiring them to eat 6 times a day like I did when I was bodybuilding. I suggest something like 4 times a day. I am willing to work with clients and back it off to like 3 times a day if eating 4 times a day just doesn't work in their schedule. But just keep in mind, even for those clients, they're missing out on one opportunity for muscle protein synthesis that their 4 meal a day counterparts are taking advantage of. So that's really where the difference comes in, is if you consume all of your calories in just 1 meal or 2 meals, you only have 2 opportunities throughout the day to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. In fact, when I was looking up this study before, one of the things that the study explained is, if you have 6 grams of leucine in one sitting, that doesn't stimulate muscle protein synthesis twice, even though it would be 3 grams plus 3 grams. You have to have the 3 grams in one sitting, and then 2.5 to 3 hours later, you have the other 3 grams. This is why for all of us busy professionals, for executive level humans, for people who have a very packed calendar during the day, it can be very difficult and very challenging to figure out how you're going to do this. Which is why, if this is interesting to you, I just encourage you to commit to it for something like 30 days. Ask your family for support, ask your colleagues for support, explain that you're really interested in trying to experiment on your body where you want to gain muscle and lose fat in a 30-day period, and you want to see how well this works so you can prove to yourself that this muscle protein synthesis science is real and that it applies to you, and you'll be blown away by the results. If you're interested in getting something like the Body Health Aminos or the Kion Aminos to support you in your journey, I will put links below this video. I do have discount codes for you on both of those supplements, which are amazing. I do tell people that you can do 2 servings of the Body Health Amino Acids as almost the equivalent, actually as the equivalent of a meal of 30 grams of protein. So when we're eating protein, when we're eating 30 grams of protein, we're trying to get these essential amino acids. That's really what we want. So 2 servings of the Body Health Perfect Amino Acids will give you enough of the amino acids for muscle protein synthesis, and 1.5 servings of Kion Aminos will give you enough for muscle protein synthesis, because there's only 2,000 milligrams or 2 grams of leucine in 1 scoop. And just to be safe, I want to make sure you do 1.5 scoops. So we're hitting that 2.5 gram leucine threshold, not just 2 grams. The science is pretty clear that it needs to go towards that upper end of 3, but I feel safe, and I know from my own personal experiment of getting ready for that bodybuilding show in 2017, that having about 30 to 35 grams of protein in each sitting 6 times a day for sure got me over the 2.5 gram leucine threshold, because I was eating animal source protein all day long. I hope I haven't confused you too much. I hope this is helpful. Again, if you are ever in need of one-on-one support, I would love to be your guide. You can reach out to me through my website at energeticallyefficient.com, and I will be back next week with another episode to support you in your journey of metabolic and energetic health. Bye-bye.